Lieutenant Colonel Silas Tren slammed Taryn Solberg's blue notebook onto the folding command table hard enough to rattle the range cards. Sand hissed against the tactical shelter while 15 sniper teams checked optics, adjusted bipods, and waited for the assault column to move into Tamara's Scar Valley. Cairn stood beside Taryn with his ears angled toward the dry wash, ignoring the officers gathered around him. "This is your intelligence system." Tren lifted the notebook between two fingers as though it were contaminated. Its waterproof pages held pressure readings, wind vectors, equipment serial numbers, and precise timestamps written in Taryn's narrow block script. Several operators glanced at the small supply clerk standing beneath the map board, her sleeves rolled evenly and her expression colder than the steel cases stacked behind her. A notebook and a nervous dog. No one corrected him. Taryn remained still while Tren read her latest entry aloud, exaggerating every number for the benefit of the room. Outside, the leading vehicles idled at the edge of the wash, their thermal panels fading behind the first wall of charged dust. "He wants laughter, not data," Taryn thought. Tren tapped the page marked 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 17 seconds. It showed a pressure drop along the eastern shelf, a reverse sand flow near the black salt cliffs, and Cairn's repeated reaction to ozone beneath the valley floor. The colonel turned toward the sniper detachment and smiled as if he had exposed a fraud. "Apparently Sergeant Solberg believes the desert is taking orders from her dog." A few men gave restrained laughs. The team chiefs did not. They had noticed Cairn stop panting 12 seconds before the weather station issued its last wind shift alarm, and they had seen Taryn write the change down before the screens updated. "Machines report what already happened," she said. Tren's smile vanished. He stepped closer, using his height and rank as theater, while Taryn's 5'1" frame remained square beneath a shadow. Behind him, the digital route display showed the assault column entering the dry channel at Checkpoint Copper 3. "Your assignment is batteries, filters, and inventory." Taryn looked past him toward Cairn. The Malinois had lowered his body, fixed his nose toward the wash, and begun scraping the sand in 3 measured strokes. That pattern had preceded buried transmitters twice during Palisade Zero deployments, though no one in the shelter knew that name belonged to her. "There is active electronics under the route." Tren snapped the notebook shut. He ordered the communications specialist to remove Taryn's network access, then directed a military police sergeant to escort her back to the supply cages. The route officer hesitated over the map, but Tren stabbed one finger at Copper 3 and ordered the column forward without revision. "You count boxes," he told her. Taryn accepted the notebook when he pushed it against her chest. She opened to a blank line, recorded his exact words, and added the time without visible anger. Cairn's claws dug deeper as a faint pulse moved beneath the sand. "First signal will be laser," she said. Tren turned away before she finished. The lead vehicle rolled into the wash, followed by the medical carrier and command truck, each disappearing into brown static. On the ridge, 15 sniper teams settled behind their rifles while the storm erased the far side of the valley. Then 13 infrared designators appeared across the American column at once. Taryn saw the first infrared marks spread across the convoy before anyone inside the shelter understood what they meant. One settled on the command truck's engine housing, another crossed the medical carrier's rear door, and 11 more trembled through the sand like red needles, searching for exposed steel. Cairn lowered his chest, flattened his ears, and stared toward the dry wash where the lead vehicle had disappeared. 13 designators, Taryn said. The military police sergeant, holding her arm, released it without being asked. Outside, the surface wind climbed from 18 to 27 knots, but the sand curling backward over the eastern shelf proved a stronger crosscurrent was moving above the valley floor. Taryn opened her blue notebook and compared Cairn's reaction with the pressure sequence she had recorded during the previous 6 minutes. "The route is compromised." Tren stepped in front of the tactical display and ordered the convoy to maintain speed. The route overlay still showed Copper 3 as clear, although the lead vehicle's position marker had begun drifting 640 meters east of the surveyed channel. A communications specialist reported that the navigation beacons remained authenticated. "Then the route is valid," Trent said. Taryn walked to the edge of the command table and placed one finger beside the eastern coordinate. The authenticated signal was real, but its timing pulse arrived 0.8 seconds late, enough to prove it was being repeated through another transmitter. Karen scraped at the same patch of sand again, and a faint metallic vibration traveled through the floor panels beneath their boots. "The beacon has been cloned." Tren ordered the specialist to remove Taryn from the network. Her tactical tablet went dark. Her radio identifier vanished from the command roster, and the map beside her name changed from green to gray. The colonel announced that she had lost all operational authority for spreading an unverified warning. "Escort her to supply." Taryn did not resist. Her pulse remained at 38 beats per minute, slow enough that she could count each pressure shift between heartbeats while the storm tightened around the shelter. At 3,689 meters, the ridge line existed only as a broken thermal smear, but her notebook showed what the sensors missed: 27 knots at ground level, an estimated 34 knot opposing layer above 1,100 meters of the bullet path, and a projected vertical correction exceeding 250 meters for the XR, 41 under the current density altitude. No clean firing solution exists yet. Trent heard her and smiled without humor. He told the sniper teams that a supply clerk was now predicting shots she would never be authorized to take. Then he ordered the first assault element deeper into the wash. "Forward movement continues." Taryn looked at Karen. The Malinois had stopped scraping and turned his head 3 degrees south, tracking something beneath the sand rather than beyond it. The ozone scent was stronger now, mixed with hot insulation and disturbed mineral dust. "Buried relay, south wall." A combat engineer swept the area with a handheld detector. The instrument showed nothing because the charged storm had saturated its baseline, but Karen moved directly to a shallow depression where the sand temperature measured 4.6 degrees cooler than the surrounding ground. Taryn marked the location and the exact time in her notebook. 14:25:52. Tren ordered the engineer back into formation. He said the dog was reacting to static discharge and accused Taryn of using an animal's behavior to undermine a lawful movement order. The colonel then directed the military police sergeant to confiscate her notebook. "Take it." The sergeant reached for it, but hesitated when Karen stepped between them. Taryn gave the dog a quiet hand signal, and he moved aside immediately. She surrendered the notebook only after requiring the sergeant to sign the evidence flap and record the time of seizure. "Chain of custody matters." Tren called the gesture theatrical. He did not notice that the notebook's waterproof pages had already been photographed through the supply inventory system each time Taryn logged equipment discrepancies. The timestamps existed outside his reach. "You are finished here." The lead vehicle transmitted a broken warning. Its driver reported loose sand, false beacon lights, and movement along both walls of the wash before the signal collapsed into static. 3 seconds later, the buried relay Karen had identified came alive beneath the valley floor. "Contact is beginning." The 13 laser marks stopped searching and held steady. One locked onto the medical carrier, for fixed on the command vehicles, and the rest divided across the weapons teams trapped inside the channel. The assault captain requested permission to reverse the column, but Tren denied it and ordered the convoy to accelerate toward the eastern exit. Push through the kill zone. Taryn stared at the altered route line, the delayed beacon pulse, and the exact sequence she had predicted in blue ink. The coordinates were not merely wrong. Someone had moved them with enough precision to place all 61 Americans inside overlapping fields of fire. This was planned. Tren turned toward her with an expression that contained no surprise. Then the first hostile emitter activated on a ridge 3,689 meters away, and every screen in the shelter filled with targeting warnings. The first warning tone became 13, then the tactical display split into overlapping red sectors that covered the entire dry wash. The lead vehicle braked beneath the eastern wall, The medical carrier slewed sideways behind it, and the command truck lost satellite lock as charged sand rolled across its antennas. On the ridge, 3,689 meters away, a hostile fire control node began synchronizing every laser designator into one firing network. All sniper teams engaged the ridge controller. 15 elite marksmen settled behind rifles positioned along 3 broken shelves above the valley floor. Their ballistic computers showed a density altitude of 8,740 feet, a surface wind of 28 knots from the northwest, and a projected bullet drop of 281.6 meters at the target range. None of the screens agreed on what the air was doing beyond the first 900 meters. Send it. The first rifle fired from the northern shelf. Its muzzle blast vanished into the storm, and the shooter remained behind the optic while the round traveled through nearly 4 kilometers of unstable air. 7 full seconds passed before the spotter saw a faint thermal disturbance 14.2 meters left of the target and too low to calculate with confidence. Miss left. The second team corrected for the visible error and added 6.4 mils of wind. Their round crossed the first hot layer, entered a colder counterflow above the wash, and disappeared from every electronic tracker at 2,170 meters. After 7.6 seconds, a dust plume rose far beyond the controller's position, long and right. Taryn ordered all teams to increase their rate of fire. He treated the separate misses as failures of nerve. Even as the weather mask showed 31 knots at ground level, and Taryn's confiscated notebook had already predicted an opposing layer moving at an estimated 36 knots above the black salt shelf. The 15 shooters began calling independent corrections because the shared network was now feeding them delayed data. The system is 9 seconds behind. Taryn stood beside the evidence table while the military police sergeant held her blue notebook under one arm. Her pulse had fallen to 37 beats per minute, slow and regular despite the alarms, and she watched the sand instead of the screens. Near the valley floor, the dust streamed east. Halfway up the ridge, it folded west. Above the target, it rose almost vertically in a heated column. 3 separate wind fields. The third shot required 7.8 seconds to reach the far ridge. The fourth took slightly longer after crossing a denser band of air trapped between the salt walls. Both missed on opposite sides of the same target, proving that neither correction represented the true condition along the full trajectory. Stop chasing the last round. No one responded to Taryn. Taryn had removed her from the radio net, and the command shelter now treated her voice as background noise. He ordered teams 5 through 8 to fire on a staggered sequence while the hostile controller continued building its targeting solution. 4 more. The fifth shooter broke his shot with a heart rate of 52 beats per minute, controlled enough for normal long-range work, but too fast to exploit the narrow pressure windows Taryn was watching. His computer predicted 279.3 meters of drop and 17.8 meters of rightward drift. The round remained airborne for 7.7 seconds before a weak infrared flash marked its passage 11 meters below the target shelf. Low. The sixth team elevated. Their shot entered the reverse current at approximately 1,460 meters, climbed farther than expected in the thinner air, then crossed behind the target after nearly 8 seconds. The 7th and 8th rounds vanished completely in the electrically charged sand, leaving no trace reliable enough for correction. No observation. Inside the wash, the assault captain ordered his people out of the vehicles and against the western wall. Enemy observers adjusted their lasers from engines to dismounted personnel, painting weapons crews, communication specialists, and the entrance to the casualty collection point. 61 Americans were now compressed inside a channel less than 140 meters wide. We are fixed in place. Taryn refused the captain's request to reverse the convoy. He claimed the sniper detachment needed only 1 confirmed correction and demanded 5 more shots before the hostile network completed its sequence. Above him, the team chiefs exchanged looks that carried more calculation than confidence. Continue fire. Teams 9 through 12 fired over 23 seconds. Every projectile spent between 7.5 and 8.1 seconds in flight, each passing through wind layers that change direction faster than the remote sensors could update. One round landed 22.6 meters short, another crossed 9.3 meters high, and two produced no visible strike through the storm. 12 misses. The hostile controller transmitted a synchronization burst. 13 laser tracks stopped wandering and held on fixed aim points across the convoy. A countdown appeared on the command display, beginning at 174 seconds. They are preparing a coordinated strike. Taryn looked at Cairn. The Malinois stopped panting and angled his head toward the buried relay. A microbarometer clipped to his working harness registered a 5.2 millibar pressure drop 3 seconds before the weather mass refreshed. Cairn detected the disturbance first. The instrument confirmed it. Taryn ignored her and ordered the final 3 teams to shoot. Team 13 applied the largest horizontal correction yet, compensating for 38 knots across the upper trajectory and a calculated Coriolis displacement of nearly 2 meters at that latitude. The round flew for 7.9 seconds and struck somewhere behind the ridge, unseen. Mississippi, Team 14 reduced the correction, trusting the surface reading of 29 knots. Its projectile crossed the valley in 7.6 seconds, curved through the counterflow, and raised a narrow plume 16.4 meters to the left. Mississippi, the 15th shooter, was the detachment chief. He slowed his breathing, waited until his pulse dropped to 43 beats per minute, and broke the trigger during the pause after exhalation. His fire control display projected 284.1 meters of gravitational drop, 19.6 meters of lateral drift, and a flight time of 7.8 seconds. Last round away. Everyone watched the ridge. 1 second passed, then 3, then 6, while the hostile countdown continued beneath the sound of wind and radio traffic. At 7.8 seconds, the thermal optic showed a brief disturbance more than 12 meters below the fire control node. 15 misses. The detachment chief lowered his eye from the scope. He did not blame the rifle, the ammunition, or his men. He looked toward Taryn, then toward the blue notebook still held as evidence. Our instruments cannot read this storm. Taryn struck the table and ordered the teams to reload. The countdown dropped below 2 minutes. The medical carrier remained painted by 3 designators, and hostile movement appeared along both walls of the wash. Cairn returned to Taryn's left knee, lifted his nose toward the ridge, and became still as another pressure change crossed the shelter. The detachment chief followed Taryn's gaze to the sealed weapons case and opened it himself, exposing the single-shot XR-41. "He is not choosing the rifle," Taryn said. "He is confirming the air changed. Its optic could function without the corrupted tactical network, but no one present had a valid firing solution for 3,689 meters." Taryn's pulse held at 36 beats per minute as she studied the moving sand, the black ridge, and the tiny changes in Cairn's posture. "The storm is not random." "The storm is not random," Taryn said, and the detachment chief understood before Taryn did. He lifted the XR-41 from its foam cradle, cleared the chamber, and placed the rifle across the firing mat with the muzzle oriented toward the black ridge 3,689 meters away. Cairn moved to Taryn's left side and lowered himself against the sand, his eyes fixed not on the target, but on the shifting air between the 2 positions. "Sergeant Solberg has the rifle." Taryn stepped forward and ordered the weapon returned to its case. The hostile countdown showed 98 seconds. 3 laser designators remained fixed on the medical carrier, and movement along the eastern wall had closed to within 430 meters of the trapped column. The assault captain's voice broke through the radio from inside the wash, requesting any available action against the fire control node. "She's not authorized." The detachment chief looked at the tactical screen, then at 15 confirmed misses listed beneath his team's call signs. Under emergency engagement authority, he transferred control of the firing position to Taryn and accepted responsibility in front of every officer in the shelter. Taryn threatened to relieve him on the spot. Relieve me after we bring them home. Taryn knelt behind the XR-41 without acknowledging the argument. She removed the electronic firing module from the optic, switched to the etched reticle, and inspected a 419-grain solid from a lot verified at 2,970 feet per second, with a G7 ballistic coefficient of 0.505 and a 1 in 13-inch right-hand twist before seating it by hand. Her pulse measured 36 beats per minute. Her breathing remained 4 cycles per minute, and the rifle settled against her shoulder as though it had been fitted to her years earlier. No network. The computer had predicted a gravitational drop of 284.1 meters, but Taryn crossed that number out on the range card. The muzzle stood 312 meters above the valley floor. The target shelf sat 41 meters higher than the firing point, and the density altitude had risen to 8,913 feet as heated air climbed the western wall. Over a 3,689-meter trajectory, gravity was only the simplest force involved. 5 air masses. She divided the bullet path into sections instead of treating the valley as one atmosphere. The first 740 meters carried a 29-knot quartering wind from the northwest. The next 680 meters contained a colder 17-knot return flow from the southeast. The central basin drove charged sand upward at nearly 9 knots. The black salt shelf produced a 34-knot lateral shear, and the final 460 meters around the target pulsed between 11 and 23 knots as heat escaped the ridge. Every previous shooter had corrected for the last visible miss, but each bullet had crossed a different arrangement of those layers. Past impacts are already obsolete. Using the lot-verified velocity, density altitude, firing azimuth, and the target's 41-meter positive angle, Taryn estimated approximately 279.7 meters of drop and 18.3 meters of net lateral displacement. At that latitude and azimuth, Coriolis contributed about 1.7 meters of rightward drift over the projected 7.9-second flight, while the transonic transition introduced an additional margin of uncertainty she could not eliminate. The projected time of flight was 7.9 seconds, long enough for the target to move, the wind to reverse, and the firing solution to become false before the bullet arrived. "She is calculating the future," the detachment chief said. Trent laughed once, but no one joined him. Taryn was not aiming at the hostile controller's current position. She studied the operator's repeated movement between the antenna mast and the central laser console, measuring a cycle of 8.4 seconds from the thermal fragments visible through the storm. When a man leaned toward the console, he remained exposed for approximately 2.6 seconds before stepping back behind the salt parapet. He repeats. Karen's ears rotated toward the northern wall. His breathing stopped for half a second, resumed, then stopped again as a pressure wave moved through the wash. Taryn watched loose sand lift from the firing mat, travel 6 inches east, and collapse straight downward. The dust above the salt wall showed the upper shear collapsing. She estimated a 2-second firing window and accepted the uncertainty. Window approaching. Tren ordered the military police sergeant to remove her from the weapon. The sergeant did not move. On the tactical display, the countdown reached 61 seconds while the hostile network completed 12 of 13 synchronization links. The medical team below reported that guided fire could arrive within moments of the final link. Take the shot. Taryn lowered her cheek to the stock. Her pulse fell to 34 beats per minute, leaving nearly 1.8 seconds between beats. She began pressure on the trigger during exhalation and held at the natural respiratory pause. Not yet. The wind mast showed 32 knots. The remote ridge sensor showed 14, and the ballistic computer rejected both readings as irreconcilable. Taryn watched the dust ribbon above the salt wall collapse, while the microbarometer on Karen's harness confirmed the pressure trough. The dog became still, but she fired on the convergence of physical indicators, not on the animal alone. Now, the XR-41 fired. Recoil drove straight through her shoulder. The muzzle blast flattened the sand around the bipod, and the cartridge case struck the mat beside her right hand. Taryn remained in the optic because the result did not exist yet. The projectile crossed the first 740 meters in less than a second, entered the reverse flow above the wash, and began spending velocity against air that no instrument had modeled correctly. Round in flight. 2 seconds passed. Then 4. The hostile countdown continued while Tren stared at the target display as though force of rank could produce an immediate impact. At 6 seconds, the fire control operator emerged from behind the salt parapet and moved toward the central console exactly as Taryn had predicted. Target exposed. The bullet was still traveling. It crossed the final lateral shear, accumulated the expected Coriolis drift, and continued down the corrected trajectory while the controller reached for the synchronization key. At 7.9 seconds, the central thermal shape snapped away from the console and disappeared behind the parapet. The 13th synchronization link failed before it could lock. Central node down. For 1 second, no one spoke. Then all 13 laser tracks broke formation, sliding off the American vehicles as the hostile network lost its timing source. The trapped assault captain reported that the coordinated strike warning had vanished from his display. They lost the grid. Tren said it could have been coincidence. Taryn opened the bolt, caught the case, and left the chamber empty. Her single 3,689-meter shot had severed the synchronization node, forcing the 12 surviving emitters to abandon the protected network and transmit independently. One by one, their signals appeared through the storm, giving the unmanned aircraft above the valley enough data to triangulate their positions. Now they have to speak. Taryn divided the ridge into 3 wind sectors and wrote a separate correction for each one. She handed the range card to the detachment chief instead of chambering another round. Your teams finish it. The nearest emitter stood 3,417 meters away behind a fractured basalt ledge. Surface wind had dropped to 24 knots. The upper return flow remained near 31, and the projected flight time was 7.3 seconds. Team 4 fired using Taryn's corrected sector. The operator continued transmitting while the projectile crossed the valley, and only after 7.3 seconds did the signal vanish. First follow-on target down. Another emitter appeared 3,552 meters from the firing line as its operator rotated a directional antenna toward the convoy. Team 7 applied approximately 270.4 meters of drop, 15.9 meters of lateral correction, and a projected 7.6-second flight. The rifle fired, but no one called the result until the full 7.6 seconds had passed and the antenna disappeared from the thermal display. Second follow-on target confirmed. The remaining sniper teams engaged only after Taryn assigned them verified wind sectors. Some hostile crews shut down their equipment and withdrew rather than expose themselves. Others were fixed by ISR and engaged at distances between 3,286 and 3,631 meters, with flight times ranging from 6.9 to 7.8 seconds. No impact was treated as immediate, and no shooter corrected from a previous miss without accounting for the changing air. Cairn continued alerting on nearby electronic activity, while the harness microbarometer and visible dust movement confirmed the pressure changes. By the 9th engagement, the hostile crews understood that every independent transmission revealed another position. The assault force used the opening to reverse the medical carrier, recover 2 disabled vehicles, and begin withdrawing through the western exit. The last active emitter shut down before the sniper teams could engage it. 12 follow-on positions have been destroyed, abandoned, or forced completely off the network by ISR and the 15 shooters working from Taryn's wind model. No coordinated fire mission reached the 61 Americans. A young spotter whispered that the first shot had been impossible. Taryn cleared the XR-41 and closed the blue notebook. There is no impossible shot, she said. There's only mathematics, physics, and the discipline to wait for the answer. Taryn did not watch the convoy disappear through the western exit. She recorded the final wind at 21 knots, the XR-41 chamber temperature at 118 degrees Fahrenheit, and her pulse at 37 beats per minute before closing the bolt on an empty chamber. Karen remained facing the dry wash, where the buried relay continued emitting a faint carrier signal beneath the settling sand. The ridge was only the weapon. The detachment chief ordered his teams to recover brass, range cards, and optical logs from all 15 firing positions. Their recorded engagements covered exact distances from 3,286 to 3,689 meters, predicted drops between 243.5 and 279.7 meters, and flight times ranging from 6.9 to 7.9 seconds. Those numbers proved the storm had distorted the shots, but they did not explain why 61 Americans had been placed directly beneath 13 coordinated designators. Someone selected the kill zone. Taryn stepped from the shelter and announced that all personnel would withdraw immediately. He classified the buried transmitter as enemy equipment, prohibited anyone from approaching it, and ordered the communications section to erase the corrupted navigation package before it contaminated the rest of the tactical network. Taryn looked at the military police sergeant beside her blue notebook. "Preserve everything." Trent heard her. He declared the operation complete, accused Taryn of exceeding her authority, and ordered the sergeant to place her under armed escort until they returned to base. The detachment chief positioned himself between Taryn and the colonel without raising his voice. "She stays until the evidence is secured." For several seconds, only wind moved through the shelter. Taryn finally authorized a 5-minute inspection, but he assigned one of his own communications officers to supervise it. Karen reached the depression before the engineer's detector established a clean baseline. He has the source. The relay was buried 43 centimeters beneath compacted sand and wrapped in thermal fabric designed to match the temperature of the valley floor. Its antenna cable ran along the southern wall toward a fractured salt shelf, while its encrypted timing module repeated the legitimate Copper-3 beacon with a delay of 0.8 seconds. The false signal had not merely confused the convoy. It had shifted the route 640 meters east with deliberate precision. That requires the original key. The engineer cut power and lifted the relay into an evidence tray. Karen sniffed along the outer casing, then fixed on a strip of torn tamper tape trapped beneath one mounting bracket. Taryn recognized the pale green adhesive and the diagonal black numbering before anyone cleaned the sand from it. Army Supply Seal. The surviving digits read 7-4-1-9-3. Taryn opened her notebook to an entry from 19 days earlier, where the same sequence appeared beside a missing shipment of tactical encryption modules. The property system showed the crate destroyed after water contamination, but Taryn had recorded its weight at 18.7 pounds above the disposal manifest and photographed the seal before Tren's logistics officer removed it. "This came through my cage." Tren ordered the evidence tray closed. He argued that enemy forces could have recovered discarded American packaging from any battlefield and reused it to create confusion. Taryn turned the fragment beneath the red inspection lamp, exposing a pressure-activated silver line that only appeared after the tape had been applied once. It was never discarded. The communications officer tried to take the relay. Karen stepped across his path and gave a low warning without lunging. Taryn recalled the dog with one hand signal, then directed the engineer to read the internal serial plate without removing it from the tray. "Read it into the record." The serial number matched a batch of 12 encrypted timing units purchased through a rapid fielding contract 6 months earlier. According to the official ledger, 8 were installed, 3 were destroyed during testing, and 1 had been transferred to a partner force. Taryn's notebook showed a different pattern. 3 never reached testing. She had logged mismatched weights, replacement labels, and signatures that appeared after normal duty hours. 1 shipment had entered the secured supply cage at 0216, remained off camera for 23 minutes, and departed under Tren's personal release authority. Another had been billed twice under separate maintenance accounts. The paperwork was the camouflage. The detachment chief took the notebook and compared the dates with the relay's diagnostic memory. Its first activation had occurred 17 days earlier, within 6 minutes of the unauthorized crate leaving Taryn's cage. The device had been tested again 3 days before the mission, using the same authentication key assigned to Copper 3. They rehearsed the route shift. Taryn stepped closer and said the diagnostic clock could have been altered. Taryn agreed that one timestamp could be falsified, then pointed to the oscillator's thermal aging record. Quartz drift measured 0.41 parts per million, consistent with sustained powered use beginning well before the mission and inconsistent with a device activated for the first time that morning. Physics keeps its own log. Combined with the relay's power cycle counter and battery discharge history, the measurement placed its first operational use within the same 17-day window documented in Taryn's notebook. Karen moved toward a second section of disturbed sand and uncovered a fiber lead connecting the relay to a directional burst transmitter. Its transmission history contained 7 compressed packets sent to an external account registered through a defense subcontractor. Pull the destinations. The first 6 packets contained test coordinates. The 7th carried the convoy's approved route, vehicle order, medical carrier identifier, sniper positions, and the precise time the unit would enter Tamara's Scar Valley. It had been transmitted 11 hours before the mission. That was the sale. Taryn said the account belonged to an intelligence source under his control. The communications officer beside him avoided eye contact. Taryn asked for the source authorization number, the collection objective, and the legal review required for passing American troop locations to a foreign intermediary. There is no lawful answer. The colonel ordered the inspection terminated. He directed the military police sergeant to seize the relay, the blue notebook, the sniper logs, and every recording made inside the shelter. He also ordered all personnel to describe the ambush as an enemy exploitation of weather interference. That report is false. Taryn turned on Taryn and told her that she was now under investigation for disobeying orders, interfering with command authority, and disclosing classified procurement information. Her pulse remained at 38 beats per minute. She handed the notebook to the military police sergeant only after he signed the evidence seal in front of 2 witnesses. Chain of custody. The detachment chief quietly copied the seal number. Each of the 15 sniper teams preserved its own firing data, including the 3,689-meter engagement, the 29 to 34 not layered winds, the 279.7-meter calculated drop, and the 7.9 second time of flight. Their records independently showed that Taryn's predictions existed before each atmospheric change. 15 witnesses. The communications specialist recovered a hidden buffer from the convoy network. It showed that the original route had remained correct until Taryn's command credentials approved a revised coordinate package at 0312 that morning. The change moved the entire formation into the overlapping designator sectors while leaving the briefing map visually unchanged. He authorized the shift. Taryn compared that time with another entry in her notebook. At 0314, 2 minutes after the route alteration, Taryn had signed the release of 6 defective optical processors for emergency destruction. Those processors belonged to the same procurement program that had supplied the mistimed sensors used by the sniper teams. The failed instruments were part of it. The pattern became clear. Taryn had diverted encrypted relay components through false disposal records and sold the convoy route to an armed intermediary. Warrant Officer Daniel Roque had discovered the duplicate invoices and requested a protected interview after the mission. Taryn then placed Roque's vehicle at the front of the column, where the coordinated strike was most likely to erase both the witness and the equipment trail. He was the loose end. The ambush was designed to kill Roque, destroy the relay network, and make the resulting losses appear to be the consequence of a navigation failure inside an unreadable storm. The 15 missed shots would have strengthened that cover story. Taryn's 3,689-meter hit had broken more than the hostile network. It had preserved the witnesses Taryn needed dead. That is why he kept them moving. Taryn ordered the military police sergeant to place Taryn in restraints. The sergeant hesitated, then followed the lawful order without force while documenting the time as 15 hours, 11 minutes, and 26 seconds. Karen stayed at Taryn's side until another handler took his lead. Easy, Karen. The colonel collected the relay and declared that all evidence would travel under his personal control. Taryn looked at the signed seals, the copied firing logs, and the communications buffer already stored across separate systems. He believed he was gathering the truth into one container he could destroy. He is counting objects, not copies. As they prepared to leave Tamarisk Scar Valley, the detachment chief approached Taryn and asked whether she had known before the mission that Tren was corrupt. She shook her head. She had known that equipment was disappearing, signatures were being backdated, and warnings were being buried, but suspicion was not proof. Now it is proof. Tren climbed into the command vehicle and began dictating the official narrative before the convoy moved. He described Taryn as an unstable supply clerk who had endangered the mission, claimed his route had been altered by enemy cyber interference, and credited the sniper detachment with disrupting the laser network through cumulative fire. He is writing his escape. Taryn sat under guard with her hands secured in front of her. Her pulse returned to 36 beats per minute as Karen lay against her boots, and the convoy turned toward base. Beyond the window, the storm erased the black ridge where 13 emitters had gone silent. The next battlefield will have walls. Taryn entered the hearing room with her wrists unrestrained, Karen absent, and her blue notebook sealed inside a transparent evidence sleeve on the prosecution table. The concrete chamber beneath forward operating base Harrow contained no flags beyond the regulation colors, no windows, and no audience except the preliminary hearing officer, government counsel, Taryn's defense counsel, a court reporter, warrant officer Daniel Roque, and the 15 sniper witnesses seated along the rear wall. Lieutenant Colonel Silas Tren stood in full-service uniform beneath the command crest, looking more comfortable there than he had inside the storm. Staff Sergeant Solberg remained standing. The preliminary hearing officer identified the proceeding as an Article 32 hearing concerning alleged disobedience of a lawful order, unauthorized employment of a restricted weapon system, interference with a tactical command network, and mishandling of classified procurement data. Taryn faced the hearing officer without shifting her weight. Her medical monitor, retained because of the environmental exposure investigation, showed a resting pulse of 38 beats per minute. Understood, Mom. Tren's report appeared on the central screen. It stated that hostile cyber activity had displaced the convoy route by 640 meters, that the Tamarisk Scar Sandstorm had corrupted all atmospheric sensors, and that Taryn had seized the XR-41 after 15 qualified shooters failed to achieve immediate effects. It credited the collapse of the hostile network to cumulative suppression from the entire sniper detachment. The rifle was voluntarily transferred. The government counsel ignored the statement and displayed a photograph of Taryn behind the XR-41. The image showed the small supply clerk wearing no sniper qualification badge, no special operations tab, and no visible authorization for the weapon in her hands. Tren watched the preliminary hearing officer study it before describing her as a logistics soldier who had mistaken personal intuition for tactical authority. She had a dog and a notebook. The first charge concerned her warning that the Copper-3 beacon had been cloned. Tren testified that the warning was unsupported when issued, that Karen's behavior could not supersede authenticated navigation data, and that removing Taryn from the communications network had been necessary to preserve discipline. He said she had continued interfering after her access was revoked. I documented the warning at 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 17 seconds. The sealed notebook lay 6 feet away, but the hearing officer did not authorize it to be opened. Government counsel argued that its contents included improperly collected classified information and should remain sealed until a security review established whether Taryn had lawful access. The colonel smiled faintly as the notebook remained sealed. The book proves nothing until we can read it. The next exhibit was the XR-41 firing log. It recorded the decisive shot at exactly 3,689 meters, a muzzle-to-target elevation difference of 41 meters, a calculated time of flight of 7.9 seconds, and a corrected gravitational drop of 279.7 meters. Surface winds had varied between 29 and 32 knots, while an opposing upper layer approached 34 knots. Taryn's biometric record showed 34 beats per minute when the trigger broke. The result was not immediate. Taryn called the hit an unforeseeable outcome produced by atmospheric coincidence. He emphasized that nearly 8 seconds had passed between discharge and impact, allowing the hostile operator to move unpredictably. In his version, Taryn had fired without knowing where the target would be when the projectile arrived. She gambled with a restricted round. The detachment chief was called first. He testified that he had opened the XR-41 case, transferred the rifle, and invoked emergency engagement authority because 61 Americans faced a coordinated guided fire attack. He confirmed that all 15 previous shots had missed after spending between 7.5 and 8.1 seconds in flight through opposing wind layers. The storm defeated our instruments, not her calculations. Government counsel asked whether the chief had possessed authority to override a lieutenant colonel's direct order. The chief answered that the tactical element inside the kill zone had requested immediate support and that Taryn's communications link had become intermittent. Under the unit's emergency procedures, the senior qualified fires leader at the surviving position could authorize defensive engagement. I gave her the rifle. The second sniper testified that Taryn had predicted a 2.3-second pressure window before the weather mast recorded the shift. The third confirmed that she had divided the trajectory into 5 atmospheric zones. The fourth described her correction for 1.7 meters of Coriolis drift. Each witness repeated that no one had observed an immediate hit. They had waited the full 7.9 seconds before the central emitter failed. The physics was visible after the fact. Taryn remained composed. He argued that accurate reconstruction did not prove lawful authority at the moment of action. He said a soldier could violate orders and still obtain a favorable result. The purpose of command, he told the hearing officer, was to prevent individuals from replacing discipline with personal judgment. Success does not erase disobedience. Taryn's appointed defense counsel requested access to the navigation buffer, the relay diagnostic memory, the signed evidence seals, and the copies of the 15 firing logs. The government counsel replied that several items had been transferred into a restricted counterintelligence review and were unavailable to the hearing. Taryn claimed operational security prevented broader disclosure. The evidence is being protected. Taryn looked toward the communications specialist seated behind the witness rail. He kept his face forward but tightened his hand around a small storage case resting on his knees. The case contained the convoy network buffer copied before Taryn assumed control of the relay. Copies are not contraband. The hearing officer asked Taryn whether she denied touching the XR-41 after being told not to. She did not. The officer asked whether she had continued issuing tactical warnings after her network credentials were revoked. She had. The officer asked whether she had directed personnel to preserve evidence contrary to Taryn's withdrawal order. Taryn answered yes. Then what exactly do you dispute? Her pulse remained at 37 beats per minute. She looked first at the preliminary hearing officer, then at Taryn. I dispute that his orders served the mission. The room became still. That answer moved the hearing beyond whether Taryn had acted and toward whether Taryn's commands had been lawful, mission-related, and issued in good faith. Her defense counsel requested permission to question him about the route alteration approved at 0312, the 6 optical processors released for destruction at 0314, and the external transmission sent 11 hours before the convoy entered Tamara's Scar Valley. Those matters exceed the scope. Taryn's confidence sharpened. He said the procurement transactions were classified, the route package had been altered by hostile action, and the external account belonged to a protected intelligence source. He refused to provide the source authorization number in an open preliminary hearing. You do not have clearance to ask. Taryn's counsel noted that the proceeding was already closed and attended only by cleared personnel. Taryn replied that none of them possessed the compartmented access required for his program. He then requested the notebook be destroyed after review because it allegedly reproduced protected serial numbers and operational data without authorization. The unauthorized record is itself evidence of misconduct. The military police sergeant who had sealed the notebook was called. He confirmed that Taryn surrendered it voluntarily, demanded proper chain of custody, documentation, and identified 2 witnesses before releasing it. He also confirmed that Taryn later attempted to replace the original evidence sleeve with one bearing a different collection time. I refused the substitution. Taryn said the change had been an administrative correction. The sergeant produced both seal requests. One marked 15 hours 11 minutes and 26 seconds, and the second marked 16 hours 4 minutes and 2 seconds. The later form would have placed seizure after the relay inspection, making it possible to claim Taryn inserted the serial numbers afterward. 47 minutes matter. Government counsel objected that the sergeant was drawing a conclusion beyond his personal knowledge. The hearing officer sustained the objection but admitted both forms. Taryn's expression did not change, though the pulse monitor at his wrist climbed from 76 to 91 beats per minute. Clerical discrepancies happen in combat. The communications specialist was called next. He testified that the original route remained correct until credentials assigned to Taryn approved a revised coordinate package at 0312. Taryn responded that his credentials had likely been cloned through the same hostile system that corrupted the beacon. The specialist opened the storage case and produced the network buffer. Credential use required a physical token. The approval record included the token's hardware signature, a biometric confirmation, and a command terminal location inside Taryn's secure planning room. The timestamp preceded mission departure by 2 hours and 38 minutes. That cannot be done remotely. Taryn accused the specialist of mishandling classified data and demanded his immediate removal from duty. The hearing officer ordered the witness to remain seated. Taryn watched the preliminary hearing officer's attention shift from her to the lieutenant colonel for the first time. The battlefield moved indoors. Government counsel tried to restore the original charges by replaying the video of Taryn firing. The recording showed recoil, an empty case striking the mat, and Taryn remaining behind the optic while 7 seconds passed without visible confirmation. At 7.9 seconds, the central hostile node failed. The counsel froze the frame before impact and argued that no ordinary supply clerk could have reasonably predicted the result. Ordinary is not a legal standard. Taryn's defense counsel requested her full personnel annex. The base records officer reported that the annex was compartmented and nearly 90% redacted. Taryn claimed that whatever remained hidden could not be considered because neither side had authority to interpret it. He looked at Taryn as though the black ink surrounding her past had finally become the wall he needed. Her file cannot testify. Government counsel requested a finding of probable cause for willful disobedience and unauthorized weapons employment, relying on Taryn's testimony. Taryn separately recommended that Karen be reassigned and Taryn's clearance suspended, but the hearing officer treated those matters as command decisions outside the scope of the Article 32 recommendation. Remove the tools, erase the witness. The preliminary hearing officer prepared to recess the proceeding when the outer security door opened. 2 CID special agents entered first, followed by a major general from the installation staff and a legal advisor carrying a thick gray folder marked with multiple compartmented access warnings. Every officer in the room rose before the final visitor crossed the threshold. 4 silver stars appeared on the shoulder boards of General Corinne Vale. Remained standing. She walked directly to the evidence table and placed the folder beside Taryn's sealed notebook. Nearly every line on its visible cover sheet had been blacked out, but 4 entries remained readable. Palisade 0, Still Point, Atmospheric Ballistic Authority, and NO confirmed friendly losses under her overwatch. Taryn's face lost its color. This hearing has been examining the wrong soldier, General. Vale said. This hearing has been examining the wrong soldier, General Corinne Vale said. No one moved until the preliminary hearing officer directed everyone to sit and recognize General Vale as the classification authority responsible for Taryn's compartmented personnel annex. Lieutenant Colonel Silas Taryn remained standing as though rank alone might restore the room he had controlled moments earlier. General Vale opened the gray folder beside the sealed blue notebook and turned the first page toward the preliminary hearing officer. Staff Sergeant Taryn Solberg served under Palisade Zero with the operational designation Stillpoint. Nearly 90% of the page was covered in black redaction bars, but the remaining lines identified Atmospheric Ballistics Authority, Emergency Overwatch Jurisdiction, and compartmented qualification on restricted long-range systems, including the XR-41. Taryn's pulse monitor held at 37 beats per minute. Her public assignment is not her operational limit. Trent objected that a classified annex could not retroactively authorize disobedience. General Vale agreed that it could not, then placed a second document on the table showing that Taryn's emergency authority had never expired. Under Palisade Zero directives, she could assume control of a precision weapon when verified command failure placed American personnel at imminent risk and no qualified firing solution remained available. 61 soldiers were inside a designated kill zone. The detachment chief confirmed that 15 trained snipers had failed before the rifle reached Taryn. Their shots crossed distances between 3,286 and 3,689 meters, remained in flight for 6.9 to 8.1 seconds, and entered wind layers ranging from 17 to 38 knots in opposing directions. Their ballistic computers projected drops between 243.5 and 284.1 meters, but the sensor feeds lagged the storm by 9 to 11 seconds. The instruments described air that no longer existed. General Vale ordered the 3,689-meter firing record displayed without Trent's edited annotations. The raw data showed Taryn's heart rate at 34 beats per minute when she broke the trigger, surface wind at 32 knots, upper shear near 34 knots, corrected drop at 279.7 meters, Coriolis compensation of 1.7 meters, and a calculated time of flight of 7.9 seconds. The video showed the hostile controller continuing to move for almost 8 seconds after the XR-41 fired. Only when the projectile completed its flight did the central node fail. There was no immediate result to invent. Trent said the numbers proved only that Taryn had made a difficult shot. General Vale looked toward the sealed notebook. Then we will examine what they proved together. The military police sergeant verified the original evidence number, the collection time of 15 hours 11 minutes and 26 seconds, and the signatures of both witnesses before cutting the seal. Taryn received the notebook, but did not open it until the hearing officer granted permission. The blue cover was scarred by sand, its corners darkened by oil from supply cages, and its waterproof pages carried months of narrow block writing. Begin 19 days before the operation. Taryn opened to a page containing the serial number found inside the buried relay. Beside it were the weight discrepancy of 18.7 pounds, the green tamper seal sequence 7-4-1-9-3, the time the crate entered secure storage, and the 23-minute gap during which the cage cameras had been disabled. The release column carried Trent's digital authorization. That signature is administrative. The logistics server answered before Taryn did. A synchronized image of the same page had been uploaded through the inventory audit system 19 days earlier, proving the entry had not been added after the ambush. The archived image showed the same graphite fleck trapped beneath the laminate, while its cryptographic hash verified that the digital file had not changed since the day it was uploaded. The notebook predates the crime scene. Taryn turned to the next marked section. 3 encryption modules have been listed as destroyed during testing, but their disposal weights were inconsistent with the actual hardware by 6.2, 6.4, and 6.1 pounds. 2 defective optical processors have been invoiced twice under separate maintenance codes. 6 more were released for emergency destruction at 0314 on the morning of the mission, 2 minutes after Trent's physical command token approved the altered route package. The transactions moved together. Trent claimed hostile cyber operators had cloned his credentials. The communications specialist displayed the authentication chain. The route change required the physical token, a biometric thumb confirmation, and a terminal located inside Tren's secure planning room. Video from the corridor showed him entering at 0308 and leaving at 0317. No other authorized user crossed the door. The token was not cloned. Taryn opened another page. She had recorded the original route coordinates from the signed movement order, then written the revised coordinates when the convoy's navigation package updated. The difference was exactly 640 meters east, enough to place the column beneath the converging fields of all 13 laser designators. Her note beside the figures contained 4 words, overlap too precise for error. She recognized geometry before intent. General Vale requested the buried relays diagnostic record. The quartz oscillator showed thermal aging of 0.41 parts per million, placing its first activation 17 days before the mission and its final test 3 days before the convoy entered Tamariskar Valley. 7 compressed transmissions had left the relay system. 6 carried test coordinates. The 7th contained the vehicle order, medical carrier identifier, sniper positions, route timing, and the name of the warrant officer assigned to procurement oversight. Someone sold the formation. Tren repeated that the receiving account belonged to a protected intelligence source. General Vale asked for the source authorization number. He provided none. She requested the legal review approving disclosure of American troop locations. He produced nothing. She asked which intelligence officer had validated the account. Tren's silence lasted 4 seconds. There was no source. The legal advisor opened a separate packet obtained under command authority. Bank records tied a payment from the defense subcontractor to a company controlled by Tren's brother-in-law. The transfer posted 2 days after the missing timing modules left the supply cage and 1 day after the intermediary received the convoy route. The equipment fraud funded the betrayal. Taryn turned to a page marked with a black tab. It contained the name of Warrant Officer Daniel Roque, the procurement investigator assigned to inspect the duplicate invoices. Roque had requested a protected meeting after the Tamariskar mission. Tren's revised vehicle order placed him in the lead truck, the first vehicle expected to enter the kill zone. He was the intended silence. The warrant officer rose from the rear row, alive because the laser network had failed before the coordinated strike. He testified that Tren had pressured him to close the optical processor discrepancy as a combat loss and warned that challenging the contract would damage his career. Roque had copied the invoices and provided their checksum to an inspector general intake system before deployment. The record survived with him. Tren said Taryn could not have known any of this when she disobeyed his orders. Taryn agreed. Her pulse remained at 36 beats per minute as she placed the notebook flat on the table. I knew the route was false, the relay was active, and your order would keep 61 Americans inside overlapping fire. General Vale asked her to identify the exact moment. She concluded the coordinates had been deliberately changed. Taryn pointed to the 0.8-second beacon delay, the 640-meter displacement, Karen's response to buried electronics, and the 13 designators appearing in synchronized sectors rather than searching independently. Random failure does not arrange itself. The working dog data was displayed next. Karen's harness had recorded his movement, respiratory activity, and directional alerts, while a separate microbarometer mounted on the harness recorded the pressure drop before the main weather station refreshed. His behavioral alert and the instrument reading remained separate but mutually corroborating evidence. At 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 9 seconds, he reacted to ozone and subsurface vibration. At 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 17 seconds, Taryn entered the warning. At 14 hours, 25 minutes, and 52 seconds, she identified the buried relay location. The convoy did not receive hostile laser designation until afterward. The warning came first. Tren accused Taryn of treating an animal like a scientific instrument. General Vale replied that Karen was not the sole evidence. He was an early indicator confirmed by pressure data, thermal variation, the recovered relay, and the subsequent attack. A warning is not invalid because command dislikes its source. Taryn opened the section containing her atmospheric calculations. Every firing window, was time-stamped before the corresponding pressure shift reached the official sensors. The decisive 3,689-meter solution predicted 5 separate air masses, a 279.7-meter drop, an upper layer shear near 34 knots, and a 7.9-second flight. The impact occurred only after those 7.9 seconds had elapsed, not at the instant of discharge. 12 follow-on engagements by the sniper teams carried their own distances, drops, wind corrections, and flight times. Each firing record showed that Taryn distributed the corrected wind sectors before the shooters engaged and before the independent transmitters disappeared. The sequence cannot be manufactured backward. The court reporter displayed synchronized data from the notebook images, the XR-41 firing log, the sniper optics, Karen's harness instruments, and the convoy network. Each source had been stored independently. After authorized clock reconciliation, their event sequences aligned within the documented tolerances of the separate systems. Independent records tell one story. General Vale then ordered Trent's 3 after-action reports projected side by side. The first admitted Taryn had warned of the route compromise before contact. The second moved her warning to after the laser designation. The third removed it entirely and claimed the 3,689-meter shot had been part of cumulative team fire. His description of the buried relay also changed from recovered hostile equipment to an unverified object that could not be located. The facts moved whenever responsibility approached him. The military police sergeant produced Trent's attempted replacement evidence seal. Its later collection time would have allowed him to argue that Taryn wrote the serial numbers after seeing the relay. The original chain of custody form, however, had already been scanned and distributed to 2 independent record systems. He tried to move the notebook through time. Trent rose and insisted that all decisions had been made under battlefield pressure. He said command required imperfect choices and accused the proceeding of turning aggressive leadership into criminal conduct after a successful mission. General Vale did not raise her voice. Aggressive leadership does not include selling coordinates, falsifying evidence, or directing Americans into a prepared engagement area. The legal advisor read the preliminary findings. Probable cause existed for willful dereliction of duty, false official statements, obstruction of justice, wrongful disposition of military property, unlawful disclosure of operational information, conspiracy, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Additional financial and counterintelligence charges would be referred for investigation. This is now a criminal matter. Trent looked toward the preliminary hearing officer, but the proceeding had already shifted away from Solberg's conduct and toward the evidence. Against him, General Vale signed the apprehension authorization and handed it to the senior investigator. Lieutenant Colonel Trent, you are relieved of duty pending investigation, General Vale said. The CID agent then advised Trent that he was being apprehended under the separately approved order and directed him to stand, turn, and place his hands behind him. The agents applied restraints without struggle or unnecessary force. His face had gone pale, and the confidence that had filled the room was replaced by the realization that every system he had tried to control now preserved a separate copy of what he had done. Sir, you will come with us. As he was escorted toward the door, Trent looked back at Taryn and said she had destroyed a command over a notebook and a dog. Taryn met his stare without anger. Her pulse remained below 40 beats per minute. No, sir. You destroyed it when you decided the people under your command were expendable. The door closed behind him. General Vale returned the blue notebook to Taryn and formally rescinded every restriction imposed during the hearing. Government counsel formally withdrew every allegation against Solberg. The preliminary hearing officer closed the Article 32 proceeding and directed that the record concerning Trent be preserved for CID and the General Court-Martial convening authority. Staff Sergeant Solberg is released from all hearing-related restrictions. Taryn closed the notebook, slid it into the inner pocket of her field jacket, and asked one question. Where is Karen? The side door opened, and a Malinois entered with his temporary handler. Karen crossed the room without hesitation, stopped at Taryn's left knee, and sat with the same stillness he had shown before the 3,689-meter shot. For the first time since the hearing began, the 15 snipers in the rear row rose without being ordered. Stillpoint confirmed, the detachment chief said. The hearing room emptied in controlled silence, but the 15 snipers remained standing behind Taryn Solberg. General Corinne Vale offered her a formal commendation, reinstatement to a compartmented operational unit, and a ceremony before the installation command. Taryn declined all three before the general finished listing them. My assignment is still supply. Vale studied her for a moment, then nodded as though the answer confirmed something already written in the redacted file. Outside, evening had settled over the base, turning the maintenance bays and concrete barriers into long black shapes beneath the security lights. Karen walked at Taryn's left knee while she carried the same field pack she had brought into Tamara's Scar Valley. Near the operations building, 61 soldiers waited in formation, including the medics, drivers, communication specialists, and weapons crews who had escaped the kill zone. The 15 elite snipers stood in the front rank. They had missed because the Sandstorm had divided the 3,689-meter trajectory into opposing wind layers ranging from 17 to 38 knots, while corrupted sensors reported conditions 9 seconds late. Taryn had made the shot because she calculated 279.7 meters of drop, 1.7 meters of Coriolis displacement, a 7.9-second flight time, and the position the hostile controller would occupy when the bullet finally arrived. Her pulse had been 34 beats per minute when she pressed the trigger. No one in formation called it luck now. The detachment chief stepped forward and presented a narrow metal confirmation plate cut from the damaged XR-41 transport case. 15 signatures covered the back. The front carried only 3 lines. Still point, 3,689 meters, shot confirmed. Taryn turned the plate once in her hand, then slid it between the waterproof pages of her blue notebook. It was the only recognition she accepted. Attention! The command snapped across the courtyard. 61 soldiers brought their heels together. The 15 snipers raised their hands first, followed by every service member behind them, until the entire formation held a silent salute beneath the white security lamps. Taryn had entered the valley as the quiet supply clerk they mocked for recording wind shifts and trusting AK-9 over expensive sensors. She left as the soldier whose warning had been ignored, whose mathematics had broken 13 hostile firing positions, and whose notebook had exposed the commander who sold their coordinates. She returned the salute with exact military precision. There was no smile, no speech, and no attempt to prolong the moment. When she lowered her hand, the formation remained motionless. Taryn adjusted one shoulder strap, gave Karen a quiet command, and walked toward the dark row of supply warehouses beyond the flight line. The dog followed without looking back. A young sniper asked the detachment chief where someone with a record went after refusing a commendation, a ceremony, and a return to visible operational duty. The chief watched Taryn and Karen pass beyond the final pool of security light, where people need warning before they know they are in danger. By dawn, Stillpoint's name had vanished from every visible roster. The XR-41 was returned to restricted storage. The Palisade Zero Annex was resealed, and no transfer order identified her destination. Taryn carried only the blue notebook and the narrow metal plate marked STLLPONT, 3,689 meters, shot confirmed. None of the 61 soldiers saw her leave the installation. They remembered only that the entire formation had saluted, and that the quiet supply clerk had disappeared into the darkness without looking back. If you respect the silent courage of these undercover heroes, please hit the like button and subscribe. This story is a fictional military narrative created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental.